Hey guys, welcome back. We're going to do a quick Q&A session here that's going to be redirecting back to the video I did on dynamic language, writing action scenes, and so forth. There was a couple of interesting questions. I thought I'd get these ones out of the way, so that's what we're going to do right now. Okay, first off, Summer Martin asked, what is dynamic language? I searched for it on the internet and couldn't find it. Okay, dynamic language is going to be something that's going to be in flux. It's going to depend very much on the writer, and it will change depending on what you're writing. When I say dynamic language, I'm talking about things that, turns of phrase that paint the picture better. Because there are simple ways to describe things, and often simple is better. You'll be told, a lot of the time when you're writing, you'll be told, never use big complicated words when simple words will work. It's good advice. But when you're writing an action scene, I would suggest that what you should be thinking about is never describe the action in a boring way if you can describe it in an exciting way. And that's dynamic language. The example that I used was referring to rolling a fighter in combat. Okay? You could say that the pilot rolled the fighter over. It describes it. It does the job. Or you can say that you can go somewhere along the lines of, in a moment of split decision, the pilot snap rolled the fighter back into back across, bringing them into line for the next whatever the scene is. You know, the snap roll rather than just rolling. That's something you should think about when you're writing action scenes. You want to convey the action that's going on in a way that feels like it's actually moving. Like you want to paint a picture so that the readers can sit back, they can close their eyes, and they can watch it happen. That's the ideal. It's very hard to get there, but that's what you want to get to if you possibly can. That's what I mean by dynamic language. Now, Promcheg said, what I noticed regarding fictional combat is the adherence to real-world implications adds a lot of depth, or should I say substance. It stops being perceived as made up and arbitrary and allows, at least for me, to better relate to the characters and stuff they have to deal with. I often hear from established science fiction writers that restrictions and limitations are more important than capabilities when it comes to made-up technology. To a degree, yes. I'm not necessarily sure that I would say that it's more important than the capabilities, because the capabilities of your technology will have far-reaching implications that you do have to take into account. But certainly when you're writing action, your limitations are going to become more evident. They're going to become more important in those scenes. So applying real-world rules to your combat, obviously this is going to depend. I'll give you an example. Star Wars has excellent combat stuff. Excellent combat scenes, excellent, across the board, a lot of really cool stuff. None of it really works with real-world rules. Starfighters should not bank into turns. There's all kinds of stuff through Star Wars that just makes no sense whatsoever, but the combat is still engaging. Lightsaber combat is super engaging, even though lightsabers make very little sense as a tool or a weapon. So I'm not necessarily sure that the real world is what you really want to be leaning into in this thing, but the limitations, and you want to keep your limitations consistent. You want to keep your capabilities consistent. So that's where I'd go in that. Now, Promcheg here goes on. Another thing about action scenes is that there is often a lack of willingness to embrace the violence. I know it sounds bad, but bear with me. If a squad of Special Forces operators infiltrates an installation where the terrorists hold hostages, they will not give a damn how many hostage takers survive. They will not execute any kind of convoluted plan just to spare their lives. They will be fast and brutal. The same goes for every kind of armed conflict. I read a book recently where the good guys refused to capitalize on the momentary situation and win a fight without significant losses because they're the good guys. And, you know, in the end, which was obvious from the beginning, they still killed all the bad guys. Ball their ships? Ball their ships. I'm not quite sure what you mean there. I'm going to assume destroy the ships. Lost half their own fleet, suffered billions of deaths due to kinetic bombardment. All of this could have been avoided. To a degree. Embracing the violence can be important, and it can sometimes not be important. Again, this is going to actually come into a cultural play. You're going to see people who make very foolish mistakes just based on their cultures. This happens in the real world all the time. That said, yes, absolutely. A special forces team that's doing a hot entry with hostage takers, they're going to actually probably not even worry too much about the lives of the hostages, relatively speaking. Which is to say, they're not going to let the lives of the hostages stop them from doing their job, which is saving as many people as they can. And they will be fast, they will be brutal, and yes, for scenes like that, you definitely want to embrace the violence, in so much as you can within the limits of what you want what you think your audience wants to deal with, and that's an important consideration. As for your second example, that would depend on, again, your audience. If your audience is going to be the younger sort of youth audience, then that kind of scenario, you might want to work it into the books. Even for older audiences, you might want to work that in, that they made a mistake. Because of their cultural inclinations, they made a bad decision, and they paid for that decision. That is also embracing the violence. So I'm not necessarily, it depends on how the book plays that, how the book spins that decision. In the Odyssey books that I wrote, Weston made several decisions that were, in retrospect, arguably good and bad. Getting involved at all might have been the wrong decision. It led to an actual invasion and massive damage and death on Earth. But then again, maybe if he hadn't gotten involved, Earth wouldn't have gotten any warning, and that invasion would have fallen on them anyway, eventually. A little bit later, probably, but still probably would have happened. You know, there is a cultural phenomenon where people want to live up to their cultural myths, and that can lead them to make amazing, epic decisions or really, really bad decisions. And often the only thing that separates the really bad decision from the epic victory or the epic last stand decision is who's left to tell the story afterwards. An example from the real world, if you look at the Alamo, what separates the Alamo from absolute legend and lost to the history, lost to the sands of time? Who won the war? If Santa Anna and Mexico had kept Texas, that story would be lost. You know, there might be a few people who talk about it, but it would have been, you would have lost a great deal of the impact. The fact that Texas managed to win that war, that the United States won the war and kept that land, or retook the land, that's what gave that last stand its impact, its cultural impact that has resonated to this day, even though everybody died. So here we're not really talking about action anymore. We're talking about cultural impact, and this is going to have a big impact on world building going forward as you're writing. So these are questions that you have to consider. but I'm not necessarily going to say that the author, the book that you use as an example was necessarily wrong, wrong in the way that they did that. I'd have to read the book to try and figure out what spin they were putting on it. But in general, I do say embrace the violence. Soldiers will make decisions based on their training, and their training is going to be in those situations, end the situation by whatever means that are most advantageous. Okay, I felt I'd answer these two. I'm going to go through, let's see, we had two more comments. William Scott said, glad you're back. Great building blocks, thanks. I hope it's useful to you, William. Kai said, glad to hear you're getting better and you didn't fall off the planet. Been working on my story and ready for more great advice from you. Take it slow and getting better. I'm full. It was a flu. It was not a fun flu, but it was only for 5 days or a week, something like that. The cough hung on for a little bit longer, but that's it. I'm fine. It's just that when you've got that, you don't really want to do anything. And I actually wound up having to do other things at the same time, which was completely miserable. So I'm fine. There's no issues there. Thanks for the wishes, though. Okay, that's it for now. If you got any more questions, I will get to them. And there's going to be more episodes coming regularly. Cheers, guys.